Welcome back, America. In January, the New York Times sent up a flare to all the leftists in America that they had to get involved in the Wisconsin Supreme Court race. And they are supporting George Soros and all of them, this left-wing trial judge in Milwaukee, whose last name I simply cannot pronounce. I'm going to ask my guests how to do that. But into the fray comes Justice Dan Kelly, representing serious lawyers and serious law. Good morning, Justice. How are you?
I'm doing well, Hugh. How are you? Thanks so much for having me on your show.
I'm glad. I want to start with the details. When is the election in Wisconsin for your job?
So it'll be April 4th. It's coming up just 2 weeks from tomorrow.
Does Wisconsin have an endless early voting period for special elections to the Wisconsin Supreme Court?
Yeah, it goes for a couple of weeks. So actually voting could start already. So absentee ballots have been sent out; they're available, and so people could be sending in their ballots even now. But then the early in-person voting starts tomorrow, and then I guess we have an election season, and it'll wrap up on April 4th.
Okay, now I want you to expand, Justice Kelly. This is crazy to me that the most politicized race in the country is a Wisconsin Supreme Court race, and that George Soros is pulling in money. What's your website, by the way, in case people want to donate to your effort to keep the law and not politics?
Thanks so much. It's Justice Daniel Kelly. Kelly is spelled with one E, so justicedanielkelly.com.
All right, justicedanielkelly.com. Earlier this morning, in a tweet unrelated to me, someone pointed out all the issues with your left-wing opponent. I can't say her name. How do you pronounce her name?
We pronounce it "she who must not be named."
Okay, there you go. Well, the Voldemort of Wisconsin law is going to come forward and try and beat you on money, on abortion, on promising. I can't even believe she's eligible. She promised to change the maps. From the beginning of time, justices don't tell you how they're going to rule because litigants are entitled to a shot at a fair ruling. She told everyone she's going to change the map. How is this race unfolding in the eyes of the average Wisconsinite?
Yeah, I think the average Wisconsinite wants a traditional justice who comes to the law honestly and who will do what they've commanded them to do through their Constitution, which is just use the existing law to decide the cases to come before the court. So this really is a race like no other, and mostly because my opponent is a candidate like no other. As you mentioned, I don't know of any race in the history of the country for a Supreme Court seat in which the candidate has come out and said that she intends to be a politician if she gets elected and make the law from the court instead of simply applying it the way the Constitution requires.
There is, I'm a lawyer, I'm a retired lawyer, but for years have covered judicial politics and I was in DC. It has been a cardinal rule. Never give a hint of how you're going to rule on a case. You can't do that because then litigants will not be getting a fair trial. They'll know that your mind is closed. So when she said that, did the left object to her saying, I'm throwing the maps out?
The left embraced that. So here in Wisconsin, unfortunately, there are some who really want to turn the court into a political institution. Now, I spent my entire career helping the people of Wisconsin remember the importance of separating out politics from the work of the court. We have a legislature. That's where we answer political questions. Our court is supposed to answer legal questions, and never the twain shall they meet. And so when, as you mentioned, when a jurist comes out and announces in advance what her politics are and how she would resolve cases, it not only destroys the rule of law and the possibility of justice, but it leads to the perception as well that there is no justice to be found in our courts. Because imagine what that would look like. You've practiced. You know what it's like to walk into a courtroom on the day where you're going to have a hearing. And, we're used to that sort of thing. But, the clients, when they come in, they're expecting to see an impartial person on the bench who will seriously look at the arguments that the lawyers are making and decide the cases according to the law and nothing else. But if you walk in and you see the judge and you go, wait a minute, I know you. You were just out in public yesterday talking about your politics, and you were talking about this very law that I'm bringing to you today that controls the disposition of my case, and I heard you talk about how much you dislike it. Now, is that person going to have any sense that they're going to get a fair hearing, that they're going to get a decision that it comports with the law? Or will they instead think, well, I guess my case is going to be decided according to the judge's politics? And that's what my opponent is doing. He talks about nothing but politics as she travels the state.
Well, Wisconsin is the burned over ground. It's sort of like where revivals of left and right have occurred in alternate dances over the last 15 years. So everybody is marked and tabulated. It's a get out the vote effort, which is why she's raised so much money. How much money has she raised, by the way? And most of it from out of state, by the way.
Yeah. Well, most of her money is coming from out of state. So in the last reporting period, 96% of her contributions came from outside of Wisconsin. 96%. In a way, that's been encouraging to me because it tells me that the people of Wisconsin are not buying the bill of goods that she's trying to sell. So it is getting to be an astronomical number for a Supreme Court race. I think we're headed to north of $30 million when all is said and done. And we are already, here in Wisconsin, this is already the most expensive Supreme Court race in the history of the country. Not just Wisconsin, the entire country. I mean, think about that. I mean, that includes races in California, New York, Texas, Florida. The most expensive right here in Wisconsin. And I think you're right. The reason that there is that much money being spent is there is the two competing visions here could have implications across the rest of the country. So, so I'm, of course, what's known as a constitutional conservative, so I follow what the Constitution tells me to do. My opponent is a living constitutionalist. So she believes she's above the law, that she can change the document, she can change the Constitution and the statutes whenever she thinks they need to be changed, rather than when the people of Wisconsin decide to change it through their legislature. That's the
I had on last week, Justice Kelly, James Rosen to talk about this book, Scalia, Rise to Greatness. And Justice Scalia's confirmation hearing was a extended display of restraint and refusing to comment on how he would decide. They even asked him about Marbury versus Madison. And he wouldn't comment on Marbury versus Madison because he said, well, that is a pillar of the law, but he wouldn't say I'm not going to overrule it because he would not say. Ruth Bader Ginsburg did the same thing the next time she was up. I am astonished that anyone outside of the hard left has not condemned your opponent. And so where are the newspapers run by leftists in Wisconsin on this?
Yeah, they are completely silent on it. So they run very fawning reviews of what she talks about. And indeed, Hugh, you might be interested in this. So the coverage goes something like this. Here are the politics that Janet is talking about. Now, Dan's not talking about his politics. What's he trying to hide? As if this is a thing that jurists are supposed to do rather than something they're supposed to stay as far away from as they possibly can. So, I mean, it's just... so the media wants to turn this into a political institution, and so they are egging on my opponent, and they're looking at me and saying, "Well, goodness, why don't you talk about politics?" Every time I talk with them, I say, "Well, because the courts have nothing to do with that with that realm. We leave that to the legislature. So we talk about legal questions. So how about we talk about the work of the court? How about we talk about the Constitution, judicial philosophy, the rule of law, what it takes to be a good jurist, all the things that my opponent never talks about."
Justice Kelly, then Justice Breyer came to my studio. We spent 2 hours. Justice Thomas is an old colleague, and we've been on the show for 2 hours. The Chief Justice is an old colleague from mine. I never ask a judge or a justice about a case or a political question, because it's not appropriate for a journalist, and especially a lawyer, a professor journalist, to ask a justice how they will rule. I mean, it's just stupid. Yeah. It undermines everything that holds up the rule of law. Is there any outrage in Wisconsin over what has happened in this race?
There is. So and I think that that's most folks in Wisconsin. So they look at what she's doing, and there's two focuses of outrage, I think. One, that she's trying to turn this into a political institution rather than leaving it as an impartial legal institution. They want justices who will follow their commands in the Constitution, just simply decide cases according to the existing law. But then My opponent's not satisfied with tearing down the Constitution. She wants to try to tear down me, too. So she's been spending millions of dollars in ads that are just flat out lies about me. I mean, and they are remarkable lies, Hugh. And they're the kind that sloppy people tell, the kind where you can go to the public records and learn that it's simply not true. And so I guess I'm grateful that if someone's going to lie about me, it's going to be about something that can be so easily disproved. But that's how ugly it's been on the left. Now, I refuse to engage in that kind of behavior.
I'm glad. And Justice, I've got friends on state Supreme Courts, and all of them are models of integrity and silence about politics, which is the way it goes. Do you still need money? I mean, can you still raise and spend money? Is there enough time left?
There is. So our code of judicial conduct forbids judicial candidates from directly asking for contributions. So I have a fundraiser that is able to do that. But as you might imagine, there is a lot of ground to cover in Wisconsin, and it's expensive to do that.
That's an interesting constitutional question. I think that's an unconstitutional law, but you're respecting it. I really can't imagine telling a court justice that they can't ask for money to run for campaign, especially in a politicized environment with George Soros backing your opponent. But if that's the law, I respect you for maintaining the judicial code of ethics. And this is a hard question to answer. I don't want to get you into more trouble with the liberal legacy media that already hates you, the Milwaukee Journal, Sentinel, and Madison TV station. Do any of them understand what we're talking about, or do they think it's a basketball game?
I think they think it's a basketball game. So just as an example, I did an event with the Milwaukee Press Club just the other week. And so it was me and 3 journalists, and they spent an hour grilling me, and it was actually delightful. I enjoyed it. But the questioning went something like this. Here's a political issue number 1. What do you think about that? And I said, well, we don't talk about politics. This is a legal institution. We answer questions of law. And I get done, and the next journalist up says, okay, so what do you think about political issue number 2? And I'm thinking, okay, I think we have to have a real reset here. So I said, all right, I understand that there's a great desire to take the court and put it in a political box, because that's what we're comfortable talking about in public, right? It's politics. And so we want to make the court about politics because that's what they know. And so what we need to do is we need to take it out of that box and just talk about what the courts are supposed to do, because one of our responsibilities is to remind the people of Wisconsin the difference between courts and legislatures and why they must not be combined. And
well done, Justice Kelly. We're out of time. Please come back before the election, and I look forward to continuing. What's the website again, Justice?
JusticeDanielKelly.com. Thank you so much.
JusticeDanielKelly.com. Thank you, Justice. Good to talk to you.
You as well.
Welcome back, America. Governor Greg Gianforte is a friendly colleague of mine. I last saw him in the backyard of his wonderful house at a fundraiser for school choice, and he and his wonderful wife are just huge proponents of school choice. And now he's a proponent of bringing tax relief to Montanans, and I wanted to ask him about that. So he joins me this morning. I'm going to talk about taxes and Tester. Good morning, Governor. How are you?
Hugh, it's good to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
Well, let's start with taxes. I had no idea that Montana's income tax was 6.75%. That's higher than Virginia. And of course, that's 6.7% higher than Texas, Florida, and Tennessee and Arizona. Don't you feel like that's putting your state at a competitive disadvantage?
Well, when I came into office 2 years ago, we had 16 years of Democrats in office. It was a little bit of cleanup on aisle 4.
Yeah.
So we've been working. 2021, we lowered it. It was 6.9%. We took it to 6.75, but we were fiscally responsible with our budget. And I think in stark contrast to Biden's reckless spending, last week we announced we're delivering the largest tax cut in state history, over $1 billion going back to Montanans. They should keep more of what they earn. And so we've gotten it now down to 5.9%. But that's just a down payment on moving it lower as we continue to move forward.
What is the goal, Governor? Would you like to be an income tax-free state so you can compete with other income tax-free states?
Well, we have no sales tax here, and the people of Montana have voted many times not to have a sales tax. So my goal is to get it below 5%. I think football games are won with 3 to 5 yard plays, and we just scored a touchdown, so it's time to huddle up and run some more plays.
Talk to me about the other big issue in the state, school choice in Montana. That's what brought you and me together the first time, is school choice. And the late Foster Friess was an apostle of it. It's burgeoning everywhere. Are you bringing it to Montana? Is there any hope for that?
We got an initial plan, Big Sky Scholarships. This is a tax credit scholarship. Here in Montana, if you're willing to write a check to a scholarship granting organization, you get a 100% tax credit up to $200,000. So anyone that wants to support parental choice in education doesn't pay any state taxes here. Now, we did in the current legislature. We're very blessed here, Hugh, that our legislature only meets for 90 days every 2 years. So I get a bite at the apple every 2 years. We have legislation in front of the legislature right now that would significantly increase the cap on that program. That'll give options to more parents and more kids.
Governor, tell me something. Is Yellowstone got anything to do with the Montana you know?
Well, the scenery's legit.
Having been to Montana a few times with our mutual friend Jan Gennara, I just know that it's nothing like that. It's kind of a bizarre place politically. And that brings me to John Tester, Senator Tester, who's declared for re-election. Why does Montana have a blue senator and has had a blue senator forever when it's one of the reddest states in the union?
Well, we're more purple than red. I mean, if you go back to 2012, 7 of 8 statewide elected offices were Democrat. Today, 8 of 9 are Republican. So we've been getting red. And John Tester's the last Democrat to hold statewide office here in Montana. I think Montanans have spoken clearly. The last couple of elections, Republicans have won every single statewide elected office. They want a conservative senator, and we'll have an opportunity in 2024.
Are you considering that race, Governor?
No.
Okay, so Ryan Zinke. Ryan Zinke is, right?
Stay tuned, Hugh. We've been, my good friend, Senator Daines, we worked together in the high-tech business for 12 years, and now he serves in the U.S. Senate. We raised our kids together. We've been talking with various people here in the state, but we need a strong candidate. Ryan Zinke, certainly a good representative. We have Matt Rosendale. There are others who might potentially run for that, and you'll just have to stay tuned. Hey, Hugh, I want to mention one other thing, if I can. In addition to given the largest tax cut in state history, we did something else historic last week. When we got done giving $1 billion back to all the people of Montana, we still had money left over. So we paid off all our state debt. Montana is now debt-free. We have no debt on the books.
That's remarkable. How's your pension fund for your state employees? Is it solvent?
Well, it is in reasonable shape. We paid off all the general obligation debt, and we've been taking steps to make sure our pension fund is strong as well. But this move is going to save Montanans over $40 million over the next 2 years, just in principal and interest payments.
You know, one of my wife's very best friends just left California for Montana, moved to Bozeman. And I think you're going to find a lot more blue state refugees heading up to Big Sky country, not because of Yellowstone, but because it's a good government, well run by serious people. But boy, I hope you and Senator Daines clear the field. Tell me who it is. I don't know who it is. Find us one candidate like Jim Banks in Indiana. We don't need internecine warfare among Republicans. We need to beat John Tester. Is he beatable?
Yes.
That's all I wanted to hear.
Montanans want a conservative senator. He goes to Washington. He votes with Chuck Schumer. Those are not Montana values.
Governor, good luck in clearing the field. That will be a great work. Well done. And I appreciate your joining me this morning. Keep coming back. Governor Greg Gianforte of Montana. America, it's Monday. Time for the Yinzer Report with my friend Selena Zito. You can get all things Selena at selenazito.com. You can follow on Twitter at Zito Selena. Good morning, Selena. Good Monday to you.
Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm great. I want to ask you a particular question. I tell people that very few people know President Trump's hardcore base better than you. And I often include myself because the heart of Trumpism is the border between Pennsylvania and Ohio. What do you make of that statement?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is, pretty accurate. These are the two places in the country that changed the most, too, as you and I know, the Mahoning Valley. I mean, forever and a day voted Democrat, and now it votes Republican.
It's the heart of MAGA country, right? It's at the beating red heart of MAGA country.
Yes.
And Jim Trafficant was the first sort of, do you remember Jim? Nobody else remembers Jim, but you and I remember Jim.
Oh, I interviewed him.
Oh, couldn't. I never got that distinct honor. I didn't want to interview Jim Trafficant, but it was sort of a precursor to Trump. So how will Trumpist America react to the president being allegedly indicted and allegedly arrested tomorrow?
There's people are going to be upset. The people that have, can only see Trump in their eyes. That's the sparkle in their eyes. They're going to be the most upset. However, I think, based on the people that I've talked to, that they're not surprised, that it's almost a badge of honor that this is going to happen, right? It's not unpredictable. And
does it hurt him in any way with his base?
Well, here's the thing. In the book that I wrote with Brad Todd, The Great Revolt Inside the Populist Coalition, Reshaping American Politics, there were 7 archetypes within the coalition of voters. And there are 2 of them that we call them rough rebounders and Peroistas. Peroistas are people, and these are the least ideological of all the voters and the smallest amount of all the voters. Those are the voters that are never going to think he does anything wrong. They aren't clear-eyed about him because they're the least ideological. So he comes first as opposed to conservatism. Whereas the other voters, it's all about, being a conservative and what it means to be a conservative. And this coalition was formed before Trump. He was the result of it, did not cause it. However, with those 2 parts of the coalition, he's first. So
the very first article I read that anticipated the rise of the Trump coalition was Peggy Noonan's The Rise of the Unprotected, a column in the Wall Street Journal in 2016. Your book was a complete examination of who is the unprotected. And right now, when we see SVB bailed out and Signature bailed out and the deep-pocketed Silicon Valley people bailed out, what do you think the Trump coalition is thinking about that, Selena?
Well, again, they believe this is always the way the system works, and that's why they believe the system is rigged. Because everything that any kind of trouble, anything that is big, gets into, whether it's a corporation or an institution or Hollywood or NFL, whatever the case may be, academia, they find a way to be rescued. However, when things in their lives, through nothing they did wrong, falls apart, nobody is there for them.
That's the essence of Trumpism, which is anger at entitled elites who are protected. And increasingly, it goes by the shorthand of DEI. Now, I've been looking at the DEI statistics that came out over the weekend. The University of Michigan spends $150 million a year on its DEI program. Berkeley has a major in DEI. I think economist Richard McKenzie and I agreed last night, we've passed peak DEI. How do Trumpists react to DEI, Selena?
In the very way that you would expect them to. This is once again what this is the antithesis of what they think is wrong with the system.
Yeah, that winners are being picked by DEI bureaucrats who are themselves been picked to be ensconced in tenured jobs at universities paying them 6 figures. And when they indict Trump and they spend money on DEI, they being elites, they ensure that the coalition, so aptly described by Selena Zito and Brad Todd, renews its energy, and especially when they indict him. Selena Zito can be followed at selenazito.com. Her Twitter handle is Zito Selena, and you ought to follow her there like you ought to follow me at HughHewitt.com.
I think President Trump, if you talk to him, he doesn't believe that either. I mean, I think the thing that you may misinterpret when President Trump talks, when someone says that they can protest, he would probably be referring to my tweet, educate people about what's going on. He's not talking in a harmful way, and nobody should. Nobody should harm one another in this, and this is why you should really make law equal, because if that was the case, nothing would happen here. And that is what has to transpire. Yes, ma'am.
Now I got to ask Jake Sherman. Good morning, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt at Studio West. Jake Sherman is at the Orlando offices of Punchbowl News, which I've never been to, and I think are a hotel room. Good morning, Jake Sherman. How are you?
I'm well, Hugh. How are you?
Good. So you're down in Orlando, and it's guaranteed to be warmer there than it is in California. But I want to begin with the clip of Kevin McCarthy, the fleeced Kevin McCarthy, along with Tom Emmers in a fleece. Does every Republican member of Congress have a fleece on?
We call it retreat casual. I'm actually, for all transparency, I'm not there yet. I had to make a stop elsewhere in the country, but I'm on my way there this morning.
Okay. You're going to be doing a breakfast with a bunch. I was reading Punchbowl News this morning. I know you're headed down there. And yep. Kevin and Tom Emmers are wearing fleeces. And I think it's funny the way that fleeces have become the costume of the day as opposed to a blue blazer. I'm sticking with the blue blazer. Jake, you wrote about this morning. What are the impacts of the former president being indicted allegedly tomorrow?
I don't know the answer to that specifically. Let me just tell you what it means for Congress, which is what we try to focus on. Number one, I mean, it's just going to dominate this entire retreat. The former president's legal troubles are going to dominate the retreat. And Kevin McCarthy and Jim Jordan say they are going to instruct, or McCarthy has already instructed House committees to begin to probe these, the DA in New York, whether he has any federal funds, et cetera, things like that. So that is the impact for Congress and for Washington, which we're going to stay focused on.
Now, last night, CBS 60 Minutes. And Jake, you're not old enough to remember the glory days of 60 Minutes. You know, they once had an audience of close to 30 million people every Sunday, and I was among them. My friends would gather, and we'd have a couple of beers and watch 60 Minutes and talk about it. It was a deal in the 70s when it first arrived. They barely make 3 million nowadays. Last night, I don't know if they did better. They were covering the Chinese Navy. What will you think you'll hear anything about China and Ukraine at this retreat?
Well, yes, because I think we're going to ask about it, especially given the uncertainty of more aid to Ukraine and how it might come together. It's not going to come together as easy as it did in an all-Democratic Washington, but this is something we are absolutely asking about it. And I imagine we'll hear about China because Kevin McCarthy's focus with the Select Committee and other items with China, I think it'll absolutely come up.
So you're going to be interviewing Elise Stefanik. I want to know who the guest speakers are, because I've been a guest speaker at the House retreat. Dennis Prager's been a guest speaker at the House retreat. I'm not going this year. Frank Luntz has been a guest speaker at the House retreat. They normally have some people just fly in and do a little song and dance for the members about, the perspective from outside of Congress. Who is that person this year? Are they having anybody from outside of the caucus?
They have three people who we've reported. Drew Brees, the former quarterback of the New Orleans Saints, talking about teamwork. They have Trey Gowdy returning, the former congressman and former chair of the Oversight Committee, and Eric Hirschman, who is the former counsel to President Trump.
Now that last one is interesting to me a great deal, because what do you think Eric Hirschman is going to talk about?
They say he's going to talk about oversight, but I imagine he's going to talk about a little bit more than that.
Well, they're always Q&A from the floor, and their sessions are always closed, and they get to talk about whatever is on their mind. And I think they're all going to talk about this indictment. Now, I think the indictment's a joke, and I really do think it's the politicization of the prosecutorial power that Justice Jackson warned about in 1940, the federal prosecutor, and by extension, district attorneys in the states. If they prosecute people instead of crimes, have lost the thread. And this feels to me like this is not Jack Smith bringing Mar-a-Lago case. This is a political, progressive Soros prosecutor who's been pressured by left-wing attorneys who left and broke their code of ethics to write books about this. I just can't imagine that Republicans are concerned about this, Jake, but you'll be there. What did you hear in D.C. before you left?
About the indictment, you mean? Or
Yeah.
Is that, yeah, I think a lot of people, I spoke to a couple people who are close to Trump who said the Tuesday date is complete, nonsense, and Trump kind of made it up. But we'll have to see. I mean, if it's not true, I have to imagine they'll move pretty soon, given that Trump is talking about it. But, listen, I think that no one knows what the political impact is. No one at all. I don't think his base is going to care. Maybe people in the middle care. Maybe it brings people to him. I have no idea. I doubt that, but I have no idea.
Good humility from Jake Sherman there. Now, let's talk about the real elephant in the room. Are we back in 2007, 2008? I had dinner last night with economist Richard McKenzie, one of the smartest guys I know. His brand new book is Reality is Tricky, Contrarian Takes on the Contested Economic Issues of Our Time. And Richard just bluntly said, this is a replay. This is a bailout, 2007, 2008 financial crisis. Are you hearing that, Jake?
No, and I don't think it is yet. I mean, that was appropriated money that went straight to the banks to rescue them. This is not exactly that, and it's also just two banks at the moment. Could it spread? Yes. There are plenty of smart people, who say it will spread, and it's just the beginning. The Bloomberg had a story this morning that there's more warning signals in the regional banking system. I don't think it's 07 and 08, but I'm not an economist.
Neither am I, but Richard does. I'm not feeling the stress, and I didn't hear anyone else talk about it all weekend long. But the Fed threw open its liquidity window, as did the central banks of every major Western country yesterday, and said, if you need money, call us. We'll back up any bank. We'll lend them all the money they need to be liquid. And so the money's flying around again. That's why Richard's worried, is when the money starts flying around. The SVB bank collapse. Do you remember Peggy Noonan's piece from 2016, The Rise of the Unprotected?
No, I don't.
It's probably the first clear statement of what powered Trump's election in 2016. And it was the unprotected who have no resilience, no special friends, no connections, versus the folks who will be underwriting the GOP House retreat or the Democratic House retreat or SVB Bank. And it's a lot having to do with a lot of Americans feeling like they are left behind by elites. Does that resonate with you, Jake?
Absolutely, and it did power Trump's election, and it's been one of the big undercurrents of our politics for the last 10 years.
And I think that's the SVB Bank story. I mean, have you followed it closely? Do people talk about it? I've been out of the Beltway since December, and I won't be back until teaching is done in April. I just don't know how much people, well, I was there for dinner a couple of times, but I mean, I won't be back living there until April. Do people obsess on the SVB like they do on the West Coast?
Yeah, I mean, listen, of course, especially in the circles that I run in, because they're political circles, and this is a big issue, and it could end up with legislation. It definitely ended up with issues at the regulators, but yeah, people talk about it all the time.
So we went from Joe Biden 2 weeks ago Friday saying no bailout, not going to do anything about SVB, to a complete bailout on Sunday. What happened, Jake? Have you figured out yet from the super lobbyists for the banks and for people like Roku and all the depositors, have you figured out who made the magic phone call yet?
No, but I don't think it's as neat and clean as that. I really don't. I think that there was concerns of contagion. I think that Republicans were incentivized by the fact that they didn't want legislation and they didn't want to have to take action on their own. And they they lobbied the Fed, they lobbied the FDIC, and I think it was more just this was what was in everyone's interest, I think, rather than listen. I'm sure lobbyists were all over this, but I think that it was a little bit different, I think it was just different than that.
Yeah, when you scratch around at the House GOP conference and you're interviewing Elise Stefanik, ask her if she got any calls from SVB lobbyists or depositor lobbyists, because I don't think they lobbied the Republicans, Jake. I think this was a total Biden shakedown of the FDIC and the Fed, and they got hammered. Democrats got hammered to call the president and reverse his Friday stance. But we'll see. Jake Sherman, I will look forward to your report tomorrow morning in Punchbowl News. Everyone should go to punchbowlnews.com and get Jake's morning reports. They're always on target. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh, joined now by Josh Kraushaar, who works at so many places I no longer know where he works. Josh, how do you tell people, what is your job now?
Well, so my new job is editor-in-chief of Jewish Insider, but I also am remaining at Axios as the contributor to Sunday Sneak. So you're still going to be getting the weekly newsletter on politics at Axios while I'm also helping.
Well, good move by Axios. Josh, were you a member of the high school band?
No, I was a journalist covering high school sports. Never was in the band.
Did you ever cover the band?
I never covered. I covered high school football. I didn't cover high school band.
I find that to be a huge glaring omission. Which high school did you attend?
The great Annandale High School here in Northern Virginia.
And what's the name of the Annandale High School newspaper?
It is the A-Blast, where I was also editor of that paper, and we were the only high school in the country named the Adams, named during the Cold War. In the 1950s.
Oh, you're the Annandale Adams?
That is right. We were, I think, the only Adams in the country.
Is that still allowed? Has that been, have they taken down the picture of the electric guy with the lightning bolts around his head, the nuclear industry Adam?
No, it's still the same, and I think we still have like a bomb shelter when the school was created in the 50s. So,
the Annandale Adams. And well, okay, look, I digress, but Dwayne was at a band camp competition over the weekend. I just found out that Adam was in the band, so there's a band subculture surrounding the Hugh Hewitt Show production. Josh, you wrote yesterday about the Manhattan prosecutor, and he's Javert. If anyone doesn't know Les Mis, if I had a producer, we would play Javert coming after whoever the protagonist is, I can't remember at this moment. What is going on here? This is the stupidest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah, look, it is something that it feels like both extremes on the left and the right feed off of each other. And if you told me that the indictment, a potential indictment against President Trump would be over hush money to Stormy Daniels, I wouldn't believe you, right? I mean, there are so many other cases, there are so many other issues, whether it's in the Fulton County case, what happened on January 6th that the special counsel is looking into. If Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan DA, is the first to indict Trump over hush money payments to Stormy Daniels and the just celebrity reality show that's going to entail, it would help Trump in the primary. Like, I have little doubt that Trump would be able to feed on sort of the grievances that this was a politicized case, and it would divide the country even more than we've seen in recent years. So I wonder how much of this is coming from the Trump camp, and saying that I know Trump tweeted or put on his Truth Social account that he was expecting some indictment on Tuesday. That doesn't seem to be the case, but I wonder how much of this is coming from the DA's office and how much of this is coming from the Trump.
Well, the Truth Social post could easily be the former president taking a phone call from his lawyer team, and the lawyer's telling him, worst case scenario, you're going to be indicted Tuesday. Throwaway line. Worst case scenario, you're going to get invited next week, you're a ham sandwich. And Trump going off on the handle and putting out the word to his folks that I'm about to be indicted. But the best case is Bragg just goes away. Have you ever read Justice Jackson's speech on the role of the federal prosecutor?
It's been a while since I've seen that.
Yeah, it's a 1940 speech, and it's just about how prosecutors have to go after crimes, not people. I think this is a nightmare for America if we become involved in serial prosecutions of former presidents. And just like Harry Reid and the filibuster, what goes around comes around. And if you start prosecuting former Republican office holders on trumped-up charges, pardon the pun, you'll end up with the Bidens and everybody else prosecuted when the Republicans take over. I mean, it's just crazy to go down this road.
Well, and also, Hugh, it feeds into this narrative, which I think is partially unfounded, but that there is this deep state, there is this bureaucracy, there is this group of people that are unhinged by the former president who are just out to get Trump, no matter the facts, no matter the substance. It's just become a zealous cat and mouse chase for these folks, and this feeds into, I think, some very unhealthy views of the role of government, the role of the intelligence agencies, the role of the FBI and national security officials. But that this is the type of if this happens, if Alvin Bragg indicts Trump on the Stormy Daniels situation, it would certainly feed those those conspiracy theories and otherwise, I think, unhealthy views about the national security apparatus.
Quick exit question, Josh. Put on your Jewish Insider hat. The Israeli debate over their constitution and their Supreme Court and judicial review is an Israeli debate. I don't comment on it because it's an Israeli debate. I would no more care about what a foreigner thought about our debate about the American Supreme Court than I would care about their view on baseball. Why are so many Americans getting involved in it? I mean, Joe Biden called Netanyahu. I wouldn't even take the call if it's about a domestic issue.
Yeah, well, the one thing I'll say is that there are a lot of parallels. I hate to make comparisons. They're not, a lot of these comparisons between U.S. politics and Israeli politics are not apt. But in the case of the judicial debate in Israel, it really is a divide in the country over values and Ashkenazi versus Sephardic, religious versus secular. It mirrors in many ways what we saw in 2016 and 2017 over Trump when he first came onto the political scene. So the issues are different. This is about how much power the judiciary has, how whether there should be more checks and balances in the Israeli system. These are very, very important issues. But the politics in Israel are very cultural, very over secular versus religious lines. It reminds me a lot of what we saw in the United States when Trump was first elected president.
But what it doesn't remind me of is people from Israel commenting on whether or not to abandon the filibuster and pack the Supreme Court. I just cannot believe Biden called Netanyahu on that. Josh Kraushaar, always good to talk to you. Follow him on Twitter at Josh Kraushaar.